And we're on Masechta Shabbos, Tes Vav, Gufa. We said that in the attic where Chananya ben Chizkiah went up, they made 18 gzeirot, and they argued in 18. So the Gemara says Vatanya Hushru. There's another brayso that says that they agreed. So Boba Yom Nechleku L'Macha Hushru. Yeah, that day they had machlokas, but the next day they agreed between them that they would paskin like those gzeiros. Okay, Gufa Om Ravuna. Bishlosha Makomos Nechleku Shammai v'Hillel. We mentioned last night that there are 3 places where Shammai and Hillel themselves, not the Talmidim, but themselves argue. Shammai Omer Mikav Chala, v'Hillel Omer Mikabai. So there is a din that when you make dough, when you're baking bread, you have to give challah to the kohen. So the question is, how much dough that you're working with is there a chiyuv challah on the dough? So Shammai says it's got to be a cup. Hillel says 2 cups. And Chachamim are lo k'divrei zeh v'lo k'divrei zeh. No, it's neither like Shammai or Hillel. Ela kavu meftzah chai b'challah. 1.5 cup. Mishigilo nidos. Now, at some point, they added a 1/6 to the measurement that was the Yerushalayim measurement. So the measurement grew a little bit of what a kav is. So at that point, 5/4 of a kav, not 1.5, but 5/4, right? 1/4 less than 1.5 is what's chayiv and chal. But Rabbi Yosef says no. Chamisha, if it was 5/4, turim. Chamisha v'ol chayiv. It's got to be a little bit more. The idech. What's the other machlokas between Shammai and Hillel? Hillel omer melohin mayim shu'uvim poisim samikva. That if you don't have the proper shear, you need 40 saw. Let's say you have less than 40 saw. So according to Hillel, 1 hin, which is 12 lug, will passel a mikvah of mayim shu'uvim, carried water. And that's the Melohin is the language that Hillel got from his Rebbe. Shammai Omer Tisha Kabi, not 12 hin, but 9 kav. So it's a less amount of Mayim She'uvim would possibly make mikvah. The Chachamim Omer Lo K'divrei Zeh v'Lo K'divrei Zeh. The halacha is not like Shammai, not like Hillel. Rather, Ad shebo shnei gardim mishara ashvash v'shalayim. 2 workers, and it describes what they did. A gardi is like a garbage collector, and like we say, you can't appoint Kohen Gadol Melech from that kind of job. So it shows that it was a low job, but a person still should go to yeshiva to learn no matter what job he is. That's why Rashi says the Gemara mentioned what their occupation was. They gave testimony in the name of Shmaya Vavtalyon, who were 2 other of the zugos, the pairs that were the Nasi and the Av Beis Din in the hierarchy of handing down the Masorah. That's our halacha. That 3 lug of mayim, carried water, will pass the mikvah if it hadn't. Now, once you have 40 saw in the mikvah, it's like no matter what you dump in there, the mikvah is going to be kosher. We're talking about if the mikvah has less than 40 saw, how much will pass? So the din is it's 3 lug, v'kimu chacham estivreim. So that's 2 machlokas between Shammai and Hillel. The idich, what's the third? This is something we're familiar with from Masechta Nida. Shammai Omer, Kol HaNoshim Dayan Shaita. That when a woman becomes a Nida, when she starts seeing blood, the question is, do we assume that she started bleeding from her uterus from prior, maybe 12 hours before, 24 hours before, and it just didn't come out? so she didn't see it. But we know that the halacha, she becomes a nida once the blood moves from the uterus out. So the question is, do we retroactively invalidate things that she worked with, and do we say that they're tameh? So Shammai says, no, all women, no matter what they are, only go forward from where they are at this point. Now, anything that they touch becomes tameh. But going backwards, we don't go backwards at all. No, we go back to when the last time she checked herself. So let's say she checked herself with a bidika cloth a week ago, and now, and a week later, she sees bleeding. We invalidate all things that she worked with, and we say that they're tameh from the last time that she checked herself. Afil liyamim harbe. Chachamim omrim lo k'divrei zev lo k'divrei zev. Allah is like either of them. Ella me'es le'es. You go back 24 hours. Mimayit al yad mivkida l'bkida. That, so if you last checked yourself 2 days ago, this rule of going back 24 hours will reduce how much things she is tummy until 24 hours. It doesn't go back beyond 24 hours. Let's say you checked yourself 12 hours ago, so then of course you don't have to go back 24 hours. That will reduce the 24-hour rule. So right now the Gemara has told us that Shammai and Hillel has argued regarding chala, regarding mayim she'uvim, and regarding this case of nida. So the Gemara says, V'su leka, are there no other places where they argue? I'll show you that they argue in other places. V'ha'ika Hillel omer lismo. Right, we have a halacha that when you bring a korban to the Beis Hamikdash, you lean on it before you shech the korban. Now, what if it's a voluntary korban, and you bring it when you went up to Yerushalayim on the Sholosh Regalim, and you want to offer it either on Shabbos or Yom Tov? Do you do smicha? Smicha considered an avoda or malacha that you should refrain from doing Shabbos and Yom Tov.
Yeah, Ernie, I'm sorry, I lost the place. Where are you exactly?
We're on Tesvav,
15A4.
about halfway down.
What is it, Mario?
15A4.
So we're dealing with the machlokas Shammai and Hillel. We said that Shammai and Hillel argued in three places.
15A2. 15A2, not 4, Mario.
No. A4. Okay. All right.
So they argue by chala, they argue by mayim she'uvim, and they argue by nida. So the Gemara says, but they also argue about smicha, that you have to lean on the animal even if it's Shabbos or Yom Tov. Hillel omer lismo. He says to do smicha even though it's Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shammai omer shelo lismo. So when Tikam or when Ravuna said there are only three places where they have a machlokas, that's heichad like a plukta the Rav Sabadayu. That's only where their rebbeim didn't argue. By the other places, Chala, Nida, and Mayim She'uvim, there had never been a machlokas regarding those issues. This issue of machlokas only occurred by Shammai and Hillel. But by Smicha, their rebbeim also argued in it. Because Yossi ben Yoezer also argued regarding that issue, Masech L'Chagika. I afraid the Gemara va'ika haboitzer l'gas, that if you, like in the Lucy show where they went and they trampled the grapes with their feet, and whether or not the fluid that comes out of that, do they want the fluid or do they not want the fluid? Because
it's not on you.
Because they want to make raisins. They're getting the fluid out of it to dry the grapes up to make raisins, and they don't really want the fluid. So there was a debate whether that fluid can be shared. So Barminei Dehi doesn't Koshosik by Hillel Shammai. There, Hillel was able to beat Shammai, and Shammai agreed, so he backed away from his machlokas. But on the other three, they didn't back away. Those are the three machlokas that remain. Then the Gemara says, Yossi ben Yoezer East Streda, the Yosei ben Yochanan Ishu Shalayim, Gazru Tumaler Tza'amim V'Apleis Chuches. We mentioned that those two zugos, one of them was the Nasi, one of them was the Abbestin, were goyzer that if you walked into a land outside of Eretz Yisrael, you would become Tamei, Midrabanan. And they also said that glassware has the ability of becoming Tamei. Break the Gemara, Yosef and Yoezer, as they lived a few hundred years, 300-400 years before the Churban. And Rabbanan say the Shmonim Shana Gozer, that 80 years prior to the Churban is when they made the Gzeira of glassware. Amrav Kahana, Kishachal Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. When Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, got sick, Shalchulo, Rabbi, and more than Ushnayim Ushloshad Barim, tell us 2 or 3 things. Shamar Talanu Mishum Avicha. His father, Rabbi Yossi, was the major historian for Klal Yisrael. He wrote Sefer Hadoros. And all the various dates that we know, they come from Rabbi Yossi. So they asked Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, tell us some of those. Sholach Lahem. So he sent to them Kach Amar Abba. And these are very important dates that we Me'ah Ushmonim Shana Ad Shlachar V'Bayis Pascha Malchus Shal Yisrael. 180 years before the Churban is when Rome first began to rule over Palestine. So, for example, we know the Churban was 70 CE. So we know 110 BCE. Remember, the Chashmonaite revolt, the way I remember this is Alexander the Great. He died 323 BCE. And his empire was divided into 3. The Ptolemy was a general who ruled in Egypt. The Seleucid was a general that ruled Syria and Palestine. And then there was another general that ruled in India and Afghanistan, those places, because Alexander the Great had marched all the way there. And then the Seleucids ruled quietly from 300 to 200 BCE. It was only about 180 BCE that they had the Antipatus. Antiochus Antipatus was the Seleucid general that started making it difficult for the Jews in Palestine. It was the Chashmonite revolt. So that's about 180, 165 BCE. And the Greeks were still dominant. But at that time, Rome was coming out of its sort of slumber and beginning to be strong militarily. So about 110 BCE, we know historically, this jives with what the Gemara is telling us, that the Jews made a pact. The Jews actually welcomed, there was 2 kings, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, and one of the kings of the Chashmonite reached out to Rome, sort of to make an alliance with Rome to sort of fight the Greeks that were still dominant over them. So in fact, the Gemara is going to tell us we ourselves reached out to the Romans to bring the Romans first into Palestine. So that this actually jives with current historiography that we get from Josephus and other historians at that time. 110 BCE is about the time that like the Gemara says, 180 years is when Rome first came and ruled. Then it says Shmonim Shana Shalochar V'Bayis, 80 years before the destruction of the temple. Gazru Tumal Eretz Ha'amim V'Apleis Chuches. That's when the Chachamim made a Gzeira on glassware. Now, 80 years before the Churban is 10 BCE, right? Because 70 CE minus 80 is 10 BCE. And that's the time that Hillel was the Nasi. And that sort of jives with this date. Then our Boim Shanat Shloch Harvabais Gosul Sanhedrin, the Yashvila B'Chanuyos. 40 years before the Churban, which is 30 BCE, is where the Sanhedrin left the Beis HaMikdash and went to the marketplace. What's that all about? Because the Sanhedrin is not allowed to adjudicate capital crimes like murder only when they're sitting in the Lishka HaGazis. There were so many murders going on that they voluntarily pulled themselves out of there because they didn't want to execute all those people. Like Lamayil. So why do we need to know, says the Gemara, that 40 years before the Churban is when the Sanhedrin left? Lamayil. So Amrav Yitzchak Bar Avdimi, Loy Marshal Dano Dine Knossos, to tell me that they stopped adjudicating cases where you have to pay a fine, like rape, right? If you seduce or you rape, you have to pay a certain amount of fine to the father. Frank the Gemara, Dine Knossos Sakadaita? What? They moved out because of Dine Knossos? Elaema Shalodanu Dine Nefashos. It's because they didn't want to adjudicate murder cases. Now, so the Gemara told us that Yossi ben Yoezer and East Sreda were the ones that made the Gzeira on glass. So maybe you'll tell me that maybe they lived that time. Vatanya, Hillel v'Shimon, Gamliel v'Shimon, Noagun Siyusim Theabayis Me'ashana. So it tells us like this. It gives us the people who served as the Nasi 100 years prior to the destruction. So Hillel is 100 years, then his son Shimon, then Gamliel, the Zokain, who left the Sanhedrin, and then Shimon, the son of Gamliel. Now, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was the Nasi who was alive when the Churban took place. Now, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan were hundreds of years before Hillel. So you can't, Yossi ben Yoezer, he's straight Yossi ben Yochanan, Kadmatuva. They were many generations, like we see in the Sechta Avos. Shimon HaTzadik gave over to Antignos Yisoicha. Antignos Yisoicha gave over to Yosef ben Yehuda. And then they go to Shmai Vavtayan. Shmai Vavtayan went to Shimon ben Shetach, right? Went on and on until Hillel v'Shammai. So they clearly didn't live 80 years before the Churban. So the Gemara has to modify what it said. El asu inu gazra gusha lisra. What they did, maybe 300 years before the Churban, 200 years before the Churban, they were geyser on, if you went into Syria or Iraq or some other foreign country and you touched the ground itself, you became tamei to the extent that if you touched truma, you'd have to burn it. But avira lo klum. Let's say they put you in a carriage and you didn't touch the ground, but you only went through the airspace of Syria, you would not have any tumah. The Asrabban and the Shmonim Shanan, the Chachamim 80 years prior to the Churban Hillel, Gazer Avirat Litlos. There was the same halacha that if you touched the ground, you would be tamei to the point where you could burn truma. But if you went through the airspace only without touching the ground, or the truma went into the airspace without, like for example, let's say you flew the truma in a plane, or let's say it was brought in through a chariot or through a wagon, which was mafsik between the truma and the ground, then it would only be suspended. You couldn't eat the truma, but you couldn't burn it either. So the Gemara says, so what are you telling me? That initially when they made the Gzeira, it was immediately to burn the Truma. It can't be. Vomer Ilfa, Yodayim Tchila Gzeiras L'Sreifa. That means we learned yesterday that one of the Gzeiros was that our hands would be a Sheni Latuma, where if we touched Truma, we would have to burn it. That means Yadayim would Tchilas Gzeiras L'Sreifa. Only our hands were established that the gzeira was to burn right away. Hamidi achrini lo, but other gzeiros like about glassware and other gzeiros, it was done gradually. It wasn't done immediately to burn. So the Gemara accepts that and amends what it said. Also in Ugazra Gusha Litlos. Yes, when the Yosi ben Yoezer and Yochanan Ish Yushalayim made the gzeira on Syria and Iraq, if you touch the ground, that would make you tamei, so that if you touch truma, it would only suspend the truma. The avira v'lo klum. But if you went through the airspace of these countries, it wouldn't cause any problem. Then 80 years before the Churban, Hillel and the rabbis 80 years before made a gzeira agusha lisro. Then they said, yes, now if you touch the ground, you're tamei to the extent that you have to burn the truma. The avira litlos, but if the truma went through the airspace, or you went through the airspace, it would only suspend the truma. So the Gemara seems to have resolved the problem. But now the Gemara throws another problem. The akati be'usha gazur. We're going to learn that after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the Sanhedrin was set up in a place called Usha, and many takonos were made in Usha. But that's clearly many years after the Churban. And I'm going to read you a Mishnah which seems to suggest that this Gzeira occurred in Usha, not 80 years before the Churban, and not by Yosi ben Yoezer. It's not. Let's see the following Mishnah. Al Shisha Sveiko Sorfina Satruma. On 6 things that you're in doubt on, we burn Truma. Al Sofik Beis HaPras. A Beis HaPras is a field that it's known that a person, a dead body had been buried there. We just don't know where, but you know for sure. So then there's a certain din. Now, what if it's a suffix Beis HaPras? So here we're going to say what the din is. Val suffix offer haba meretz ha'amim. Let's say you have some dirt, but you don't know whether the dirt came from Syria or came from Eretz Yisrael. Val suffix bigdei amaretz. You have clothing of an amaretz, and we're not sure whether they live together with their neither wives or not. So people who are prushim would stay away from such clothing. Let's say you have a pot. We don't know whether the pot is tamei or not. We see spit on the ground. We don't know. Maybe it's from a zav, maybe it's not. Or you see urine. But you don't know if it's a person that's a zav or not a zav. Even if it's next to animal urine. So on these cases, al vaday magon, if you know for sure that you touch these things, val suffik tumasum, or and we have these cases where it's a suffix, whether it's tum or not. So the case is sorfinus a truma. We would burn truma. Rabbi Yossi, no, afala suffix magon depends. If it's a suffix, whether you touched it or not, even b'shus hayachid, so it's not vaday magon. We know for sure you touched it. Maybe you touched it, so it depends. If it happens in b'shus hayachid, you would burn the truma. Because remember, suffix tuma b'shus hayachid is tamei. Suffix tuma b'shus hayachid is tar. We learn that from Sota, because a man who warns his wife not to sequester, so then if they go in and sequester, you don't know what happened there. It's a suffix, yet you're not allowed to live with your wife. So we treat suffix tuma as tuma. So the Chachamim say b'shus hayachid only toilet. We only suspend the truma. We don't burn it. B'shus harabim tohoyim. If it happens b'shus harabim, there you don't have to do anything. And where's the punchline? Amar Ula. Elu shisha sveikos be'ushes kinu. So this suffix of burning truma, if you touched ground from outside of Eretz Yisrael, was in Usha. How can you tell me it was done by these other people? Ella. So now the Gemara gives us the final version. Osu Inhu, Yossi ben Yoezer, they were goyzer that if you touch the ground of Chutz La'aretz, is litlos, is to suspend truma. And if you traveled it in the airspace, Vavira Loklo. Also Rabban the Shmonim Shana Gozer. So the Chachamim of 80 years before the Churban, which we said was Hillel, they said ID litlos. Whether you touch the ground or whether you go in the airspace, we don't burn the truma, you only suspend it. Finally, Asu Be'usha, Gazra Gusha Lisro, that's where they made the Gzeira to burn truma if you touch the ground. The Avira Kidekoi Koi, and the airspace remained the same din of suspend. Okay. Now, Kleis Chuchis, glassware, my time of Gazra B'Rabban and Tuma. Why did the Chachamim goizer that if you have glassware, it should become tummy? What was the point? Since glassware is made from sand, the Chachamim compared it to earthenware, like clay, kalim, and since we know that clay cheres, glassware should become tummy. Now, we know that if a clay cheres, china, or anything made from clay is so absorptive that you cannot put it in a mikvah. You must break it. So if you're learning the din of glassware from clay cheres, the Gemara is asking, maybe we shouldn't be able to put it in a mikvah. Maybe we should have to break it. But the following items create a chatzitza, we know that if you go into a mikvah, you can't be wearing a ring on your finger because it serves as a barrier between your finger and the water. That's a chatzitza. So the following things serve as a chatzitza. Hazefes, vehamor b'kleis chuchis. That if you have pitch or tar in glassware, that's a chatzitza. Well, if you're telling me that there are things that are chotzeitz by kleis chuchis, that clearly implies that the glassware you can put in a mikvah. Over there, the reason why it goes into a mikvah, we're talking about glassware that had a hole in it, and they filled the hole with molten lead. Now, and since lead is a metal, then that would require mikvah, right? Rav Meir, he creates the following principle. If you had a glass that had a hole in it and you filled it with water, it would pour out of the glass. So the maimid is the lead molten, is the molten lead that allows you to use the glass. Because without it, it wouldn't be functional. So Rav Meir says to decide whether something needs mikvah or not, we look not at the main item, which is the glassware. We look at what is keeping the glassware functional. That's the maimid. Similarly, we'll have when you make cheese, you need a catalyst to put into the milk to make the cheese. That's called a davar maimid. So here you can think about it the same way. The maimid is the important thing. So deciding on whether it needs a mikvah is based on the lead, not the glassware. The Tanya, you have a hole in the glassware, you put lead there. Rav Meir says, we look at the metal. So therefore, this thing could be makabel tuma, because we go after the maimid. So it is a kli, matches, and therefore, and we don't treat it like a kli cheres and break it, but rather we treat it as a metal kli and we put it in the mikvah. The Chachamim disagree, but we see, so the Gemara still hasn't given us a proof as to why we make a gzeira regarding glassware. Let's leave it here, Elameata, and we will learn tomorrow night. Now, what time is Shabbos over?
Let's
tomorrow?
do 8:15. Shabbos is over 7:52. So 8:15 should give us time
Fine.
to make Avdol and all that. Yeah?
Okay, Mirz Hashem. Everybody should have a good Shabbos. And we'll
Shabbos.
meet each other at
Shabbos.
8:15. Let's make sure Michael Summer and Penny know that we're going to learn at 8:15.
Okay.
Good Shabbos.
Yeah. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos, Johnny.
Shabbos.
Shabbos, Mario. Okay.
Shabbos, Alan.
Shabbos. Thanks.